Good morning, guys. Today we are going to be using value and hue using that drawing app that we had a chance to use for a drawing yesterday. Okay, so we're also going to be using a technique that we haven't talked about yet, which is atmospheric perspective. Okay, so using value and hue. Remember, value is an element that tells us how light or dark something is, and hue is one of the three properties of color, and that basically just tells us the name of the color. Is it red, green, blue, whatever it is, right? The reason why we're going to be using these today is because eventually we're going to be creating a landscape scene like the one you see right here, right? And a technique that artists use, especially when they're doing landscape scenes, is atmospheric perspective, which sounds really complex, but it's a pretty simple way of creating the illusion that there's distance or depth or things going back into space in your artwork. And it tells us a couple things to do in order to help with that. So one of the things is value. So hopefully you can notice the changing value that we see in this image. If we look at the mountains that are in the foreground right here in the front of the image, we can see how dark this value is. It's almost black. And then gradually it's going to get lighter and lighter and lighter as it's going back into space. So that's one thing the atmospheric perspective tells us is the change in value. Okay? Now we can also notice that the color or the hue is changing and gradually fading into the other color. So those are two things that we're going to practice with today. There are other guidelines that we could look to the technique of atmospheric perspective to help us with, but those are the two we're going to focus on today. Okay, so I shared a few things with you guys on Google Classroom to help you with this. One is a document that kind of outlines these different things. So again, we're going to be mostly focused on value for today. Okay, and then I also shared a color wheel. So we're also going to be taking a look at the color wheel eventually. Okay, but let's start with value. So we're going to be using, like I said, that Sketches School app that we used yesterday. We're going to be using the brush tool. So you can see the brush tool that I have highlighted over here. And I'm going to be using the middle-sized brush. Okay, if you want to go a little bit smaller, a little bit bigger, that's totally up to you. So we're going to start by picking out a color. So when you click on this little tile in the corner, you could go ahead and select any one of these if you want. If you want to have a little bit more control over the color that you're using, you could click and hold, and that allows you to make a lot more changes to the color that you want to have. So if you scroll down here at the bottom, right here, you could scroll that back and forth, and that obviously changes the color or the hue. And then on here, if you put this in different areas, this is going to change the intensity and also the value, right? And then this box up here kind of previews your color. So pick out whatever color you'd like to use, and it will change that in that little box in the corner there, okay? So what's nice about this app, it's actually pretty similar to watercolor, which is what we would have used for this if we were at school right now. So I'm going to show you guys a few different ways to change the value. So we're just going to do these little swatches. So if you just paint the color down, you can see that that's pretty light, okay? So we want to start with a light one, and we're going to actually do 5 of these little swatches about the same size. Just using the same color, okay? Now what's nice about this app that's similar to watercolor is if we were going to paint these little swatches or these little areas down, let them dry, and then paint over the top with the same paint, that would obviously be a little bit darker. And that's what it allows us to do here. So I'm going to put a second coat on, not the first one, but the second one, and that's going to make it a little bit darker. And then I'm going to put a second coat on all the rest as well. So we can notice that that value is a little bit darker. So what we're going to do is we're going to have this gradually get darker, right? So we have our first one here that's going to be nice and light, a little bit darker, a little darker, 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 okay? So I'm just going to put a third coat on these. So this gives us one way in the app to control the value a little bit differently. Here's my fourth, and then my fifth. So kind of a cool way to build up your image, and it looks a lot more realistic, like it was done on a sheet of paper rather than being a digital image. So that's one way of doing it. And then the other way is to, like I said, if you click and hold on your color, you can just change the value this way. Okay, so if we were going to start off with that same color, I could paint that down, click and hold, make it a little bit darker. Click and hold, make it a little darker. Oops. And it has a little different look to it. Right? So different ways of changing the value. And then we talked about how you could change the hue again by scrolling down at the bottom. Okay? So for today, we're just going to start off pretty slow and just work with value a little bit. Okay? So play around with this using different hues, different values, and really work on your ability to have these nice even steps in the values that you're creating. Okay? When you're finished, to take a screenshot or save it to your photos and attach it and turn that in so I could take a look at it. All right, have fun, guys.